Nana, I'm scared to go home. Only 6 small words. But that was all it took, deeper than the winter chill, to send a shudder right through one grandmother's heart. And it wasn't the cold that made me shake. No, it was something far more chilling, the look I saw in my grandchild's wide, once bright eyes, that unsettled fear they tried so hard to hide. The bruise tucked away beneath a crisp school blouse. The pain that someone had tried to keep a secret, but not well enough. My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 74 years old. I am a mother, a grandmother, and for 38 years, I stood at the front of an elementary school classroom here in upstate New York. All my life, I have taught my students that keeping silent in the face of wrong is just another kind of wrong. But now, with that wrong knocking at my own door, right inside my own house, with love, honor, and truth all pulling at me from opposite sides, what would I choose? This isn't the sort of story that has a clear-cut villain. There's no perfect hero here either. There is only me, and the quiet little soul who could not raise their voice for help. Just one grandmother, standing up, trembling inside, but standing all the same. Let me start at the beginning. My name, again, is Evelyn Carter. I was born in 1950, and most of my life has been spent here in Kingston, New York, surrounded by green hills, stone farmhouses, and white picket fences. I taught at the town's public elementary school for close to 4 decades. My life was never anything fancy, just a blackboard, a piece of chalk, a chorus of, "Good morning, Ms. Sext, Carter," and, of course, the children. They were my everything. I loved teaching as surely as I loved breathing. On those icy winter mornings when the playground was coated in frost, and my hands would ache, I still stayed after school, poring over the uneven handwriting in a little boy's notebook, correcting every letter with kindness and patience. Teaching a child to write their name is easy. Cultivating a person, giving them a sense of self-worth and kindness, that's what is hard. That's what I tried my best to do, every single day. When the day of my retirement came, I thought the rest of my life would be gentle, a chance to tend my roses, sip sweet tea out on the porch, and listen to my granddaughter chatter about her new school friends. In my heart, I truly believed that's what waited for me. Quiet afternoons warming on the porch, news from my family, laughter circling the dinner table, the sound of sneakers thumping through the house. But life, I've learned, rarely turns out the way we plan, no matter what stories we tell ourselves. 13 years ago, tragedy struck. My beloved daughter-in-law, Emily, who I cared for as if she were my own, passed away so suddenly from a stroke. My granddaughter, Sophie, was only 3 years old at the time. I can still see it. That bright April morning, the cherry trees outside in full bloom. Yet for us, the colors were dull and cold. Little Sophie clung to her mother's dress, sobbing desperately, her whole world shattered. I couldn't let myself cry, not then. Instead, I held her tight in my arms, rocking her gently, making a promise deep in my heart. From now on, honey, Nana is going to protect you, just like your mama did. My son, Richard, needed time too, I thought. Grief can't be rushed, I told myself. We would heal together. But only 13 months later, Richard remarried. I never protested, not once. I packed away my own things quietly, making space for another woman in our home. Her name was Heather Young, serious, her lips always pursed in a thin, straight line. And her eyes, when she looked at me, said plain as day, "You don't belong here." I told myself it was all right, as long as Sophie was happy. That was the only thing that mattered. But reality, as I learned, cares nothing for hope. At first, Heather let Sophie call her Mom. But in just a few weeks, that changed. Heather's tone day after day grew sharper. "Evelyn, your cooking is much too salty. Please don't give Sophie sweets anymore. I'd appreciate it if you'd keep your advice to yourself about raising kids. Someone else's kid." My home wasn't mine anymore. Even though my name was still on the deed, I'd become a stranger, a guest in the place where I'd poured out so many years of sweat and tears, raising my family. And Richard? My son was busy, that's all he ever said. He'd rush out before dawn, often not coming home until well after dark. Weeks passed when I saw him only in passing. If I tried to start a conversation, he'd just smile and say, "People parent differently nowadays, Mom." Heather's under a lot of pressure too. I understood. I really did. But understanding never made the ache go away. Still, I carried on, up early cooking breakfast, walking Sophie to the bus, folding laundry, tidying dishes. The one thing keeping my spirit alive was that sweet cry of Nana, my granddaughter's voice echoing through the house, the last warmth in a home grown icy and gray. I wanted Sophie to have a childhood bursting with love, the kind I'd always tried to give to every child in my classroom. But then, one night, as we sat down to dinner, I caught Heather muttering under her breath across the table. Sticking to Nana's side again. No wonder my kid can't learn anything. Richard just kept eating, silent, head down. Chopsticks replaced by a fork, but the silence was the same. Staring at my plate, my throat clenched, the food cold as stone. So, I'm a busybody, I realized. From that day, I began to speak less. No more questions, no more hugs. I slipped away into a small spare room, once my library, now my retreat. If Sophie's all right, so am I whispered to myself. It was the only comfort I allowed these days. But deep down, I knew what was happening. With each passing week, each quiet meal, I was being pushed further and further outside the family circle. I told no one. Old friends from school reunions called, but I excused myself, saying their company was too much for me. The days slipped past, silent as shadows. In my own home, it was as if I'd simply ceased to exist. I was no longer a teacher respected, admired, not even a loving mother, or a warm, laughing grandmother. All that remained was the silence. And me, the quiet one. But there was something that would never change. Sophie was still my everything, and I knew, in my bones, that if anything ever threatened that precious spark in her eyes, I would not, could not, stay silent. It was the middle of March, the sun barely up and the air cool and damp, wisps of morning fog drifting across the old leaded window panes. I'd just finished folding Sophie's school uniform, laying it out on the bed the way her mother once did. That's when I heard it, a small, trembling voice behind me. "Nana, I don't want to go home." I turned, heart in my throat. Sophie, who once chattered so brightly about school projects and the games she played at recess, stood there, eyes fixed on her sneakers, as if she was trying to make herself small enough to vanish from sight. I knelt gently on the faded carpet, taking her tiny hand into my own. "What's wrong, sweetheart? Is home not a happy place for you anymore?" She said nothing. Her lips pressed tightly together, eyes brimming, she shook her head, shoulders bowed. That single, silent gesture squeezed my heart tighter than any icy February wind. I wanted to scoop her up, to promise her everything would be okay. But I also knew. This was not the time for empty promises. This was the time to listen, to watch, to act. And so I decided on that chilly, mist-wrapped morning that whatever it cost me, no matter what the neighbors might whisper or how my son might look at me, I would do what a grown-up is supposed to do. I would listen to the voice that could not be heard. And I will not, be silent. That evening, I cooked dinner, making Sophie's favorite chicken and wild rice soup, with big pieces of soft carrot and plenty of fresh parsley. I thought, maybe, just maybe, the familiar taste would help her shoulders loosen, would help her heart to feel a little bit safe again, even for a few fine, quiet moments. But Sophie barely ate. She shoveled 2 small spoonfuls into her mouth. Then she set her spoon down, her tiny hands flat on the table, eyes glued to the knot in the wood grain. She sat, silent, unmoving, as if afraid that even a sigh might make everything shatter. Children, I have always known, are terrible liars. Their truth comes bleeding right through no matter how hard they try. But hiding fear? Oh, they can be so heartbreakingly good at it, especially the ones who think they must. That night, I made myself a promise. I would watch, not just glance, not just notice, but see. I would learn every shadow and every silence. I became, in my own house, an observer, quiet, patient, always looking, always waiting. And oh, I saw things I did not want to see. Fine scrapes that didn't match a fall at the playground. A flinch at the sound of steps in the hall. Sophie, her head quicker to duck at an unexpected voice. And every now and then, a tiny, barely heard whisper, like something polished down by worry until it might blow away if you looked too hard. I spilled my milk and Mommy got really mad. Or, one evening as I folded laundry, I heard her confide to a tangle of stuffed animals. I made a mistake, and she said, "Don't you go telling Nana. Don't you dare tell." At first, I tried telling myself it was just my imagination, tried to believe my heart was just aching, seeing what it wanted to see. I'm a woman who spent almost 40 years surrounded by books and the lessons of decency. Certain, always, that grown-ups love their children. That's what a home is for. That's what I believed. But then, one night, I saw it with my own eyes, and the world tipped sideways. Sophie was in the bathroom. I came in to help her wash up for bed, as I used to when she was little and still nervous of showers. I reached for the washcloth to scrub her shoulders, and when the fabric swept across her back, I froze. My hands shook. A long, ugly bruise, deep blue and purple, snaking from just beneath her shoulder blade all the way down toward her waist. I couldn't breathe for a second. "Honey, what happened? Did you fall down?" She turned away. Didn't answer. Didn't even look at me. My voice, as calm as I could shape it, called Richard upstairs. Inside, though, my heart pulsed with a wildfire heat I hadn't felt in years. Not anger exactly, but something hotter, a desperate, aching protectiveness that drowned out every other thought. "Richard, your daughter has a big bruise on her back. Is something going on? Do you know about this?" There was a pause, long, silent, pin drop heavy. Then my son, my careful, easygoing son, said flatly, "She must have fallen, right? Heather told me she slipped. Kids get bruises all the time." It was in that moment, listening to him, that I truly understood. If I didn't see Sophie's pain, if I didn't hold it and hurt for her, no one else would. A few days after that, I was watering the garden, out by the hydrangea bushes at the edge of the old fence. Our neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, about my age, a kind woman with a knack for tomatoes, walked up carrying an armful of cucumbers from her backyard plot. She hesitated, dabbing her brow with a crisp apron string. "It's hard for me to say, but look, I heard Heather outside the other day." She was yelling at Sophie, really angry, in a way that, honestly, gave me chills. Told her, "Don't you get all sweet with Nana. Don't you even." It sounded so mean. I stopped watering my flowers. I just stood there, listening. I thanked her, my lips numb. She left, still looking back, worry plain as daylight on her face. The breeze blew down from the roofs, cool on my spine, and the old house seemed, for the first time, not a refuge, but something shadowed and cold. That entire night, sleep never came. I lay in the dark, heart pounding at each little noise. The doors opening and closing, the pad of Sophie's feet as she snuck to the bathroom, the soft murmur she offered the old bear I'd stitched a patch onto more times than I could count. That bear held her closer than any of us could some nights. And I knew, like a fact burning in my bones, if I didn't act, if I let silence grow, the day would come when I couldn't protect her at all. The next morning, I started keeping a record. Every detail went into a new spiral-bound notebook, the spots and streaks of bruises, the things Sophie whispered when she thought no one was listening, which days she cried herself, silent. Would it ever make a difference? I wasn't sure. But the truth, I believed, needed to be kept safe, somewhere, for her sake. On the first page, my hands trembling so hard the pen shook, I wrote, "Nana's journal." A record, so my precious girl never has to explain alone. And then, March 12, Sophie spilled water, was screamed at, cried through the evening. March 14, noticed new long bruise on right side of her back. March 15, after being yelled at outside, refused dinner, too scared to eat. March 18, Saeed quietly. If I tell Nana, Mom will get mad. It wasn't enough to write. I began to record 2 bits of dialogue on my old phone. One day, the echo came through sharp. You spilled water? Why are you so clumsy? And then, in a voice barely holding back tears, Sophie whispered back, I'm sorry, I'll clean it up right away. When I played that recording, my hands shook so hard, I nearly dropped the phone. My own house, a place built up for laughter, had become a patch of ice where a little girl lived in fear. Not even 9 years old. One afternoon, I found her crouched behind the hall closet, knees to her chest, staring into space. She didn't cry, not that I saw. And I said nothing. I just sat on the top step near her, close but not too close, hoping maybe my quiet presence would say, Nana's here, if you need me. If I said it out loud, I worried she'd dissolve right there. I wasn't sure my heart could take seeing her break again. I used to believe Richard, his easy words. She's just tired from work. Heather means well. She's just strict. But I once watched thousands of kids as a teacher. I know the difference. A strictness shaped by love feels nothing like the cold, hard edge of cruelty. So, late one night, I did what I always told my students to do when confused. Go learn. I sat down at the old laptop and typed in emotional abuse of children. As I read, the world fell further and further away. A child who looks away. A child who never raises their voice. A child who fears every reprimand. Tiny, quiet voice. Sleepless nights. A flinch at every sound. I recognized every sign. Every single one. It was no longer a question of, is there abuse or not? The real question was, how much longer could I wait before it was too late? And then, the afternoon that changed everything. It was a Tuesday, mid-December. A wind-heavy winter dusk that settled early across the neighborhood, rattling branches along the split-rail fence. I'd just gotten back from the market, picked up fresh salmon and Napa cabbage, Sophie's favorites, along with ginger snaps for tea. I set the bags down at the front door, hadn't even slipped off my coat, when crack! A flat, sharp snap from upstairs. And everything in me froze. I didn't think. I ran up the carpeted stairs, my feet so fast it felt like my heart was dragging me forward. Each step I took, that pounding in my chest grew louder, wild, desperate, filled with something I hadn't felt since my own boy was in danger. When I got to the top, what I saw stripped my words away. There, in the middle of the upstairs bedroom, stood Heather. Her face pinched sharp, her hand gripping a tightly rolled leather belt, and she brought it down again and again onto Sophie's huddled back. You spilled water? Do you see this mess? How many times do I have to tell you? Crack, crack, Sophie, not even 9. A thin slip of a child, curled up on the cold, uncarpeted floor, her head tucked behind her arms, was sobbing. Her whole body racked by cries. I screamed, "Stop it! Now!" I lunged, ripping the belt from Heather's hand, clutching Sophie close. My arms were shaking so badly I didn't know if I would drop her or never let go. Her little body shuddered against me, whimpering, the skin across her back marked red, welts rising, here and there already seeping spots of blood. Her breathing was ragged, and her sobs laced the whole room in heartbreak I couldn't bear. And Heather, God help me, Heather, stood over us, a smile stretched across her lips, flat, cruel, and distant, as if none of this meant a thing. She laughed. Laughed as if scolding a child bloody was just business as usual. Nothing awful at all. This is just discipline. If we don't, she'll turn out useless like her mother. I felt myself rise. I stood tall. I locked eyes with her, no mercy, no blinking. Discipline? This is abuse. I'm calling the police right now. She scoffed, curling her mouth in disgust. Go ahead. Who do you think they'll believe? 74-year-old senile old you? This is my house, me and Richard's. You don't matter here. My voice came back strong for the first time in years. No. But Sophie does. And what you're doing now is a crime. And with that, Everything I had ever been or loved came down to this moment. A promise kept, a voice raised, the end of silence and the beginning of hope. That's not true. This is my house. And this child? She's my granddaughter. With those words, I scooped Sophie into my arms and retreated to my own bedroom. I closed the door firmly behind us and turned the lock. Carefully, I laid Sophie down on my bed. She was still crying. Big, hiccuping sobs shook her small frame. Again and again, she managed to force out trembling words in between her tears. "Nana, please, I don't want to go back into that room. I don't ever want to go." "Back?" I wiped her cheeks gently with a warm towel, then pressed a washcloth dampened with ginger tea against her back, as softly as I could manage. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. To this day, I don't remember exactly what I did first or what I did next. All I know is that my heart was brimming, swirling with a feeling I hadn't allowed myself for years. The raw heat of anger and a sadness so sharp, I thought it would split me in two. Time drifted on, slow and heavy. Around 7 o'clock that evening, Richard came home. The minute I heard the front door open, I went straight to the entryway, boots and jacket still on, and caught his arm before he could even set down his briefcase. "Come inside," I told him, flat and cold. "You need to see your daughter's back." He looked at me, frowning, then asked, careful, skeptical, "What are you talking about?" I said nothing. Instead, I led him quietly upstairs. Sophie was still clinging to my hand. She wouldn't let go. In the hush of that dim-lit room, I carefully lifted the back of my granddaughter's shirt. The room went dead silent. Richard stood there, frozen, caught in the doorway, staring at the bruises striping down Sophie's back. For a moment, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Sophie squeezed my hand as though she might fall away if she let go. I didn't dare blink. After a long, broken pause, my son let out a heavy sigh. He dropped his gaze to the floor, shoulders slumping under some weight I couldn't yet name, and then, instead of the outrage or worry or even confusion I'd braced for, he said, in a voice that didn't sound at all like my boy, "Mom, please, let's not make this a big deal." I truly thought I'd misheard him. "What did you just say?" "After seeing this, after seeing what's happened to your own daughter, you want me to keep quiet? You want me, her grandmother, to keep this to myself?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. His voice came, tiny and wounded. "If people find out, she'll lose everything. Her job, her friends, her reputation. She's young, she's just strict sometimes. Mom, please try to understand her side too." I stood lost, feeling the blood drain straight out of my feet. Those words, those few words were like a blade. They slashed away every certainty I'd ever clung to. Was I no longer his mother? Was I just an old woman, a helpless bystander, left to witness a lifelong tragedy I could do nothing to stop? The man I'd raised, clung to after school concerts, sent off proudly to college, welcomed at his wedding, celebrated when he became a father? The same man was now standing before me, speaking up for the person who'd just hurt his own child. I mustered to ask, my voice nothing but a coarse whisper. "And what about Sophie? What is she losing?" No reply. He turned his back on us. I wanted to scream. I wanted the whole town to hear me. "There's a child being abused in this house." But the words stopped somewhere behind my tongue. Because, in a flash as clear as lightning, I realized nobody wants to hear it. Nobody ever does. Nobody wants to get tangled up in someone else's mess. So I decided right then, I would not waste breath screaming into silence. I would act. That very night, I began a new chapter in my journal. I wrote down everything, every bruise, every fearful glance, every word my granddaughter whispered, begging for help without speaking it aloud. I attached the photographs I'd taken, saved every audio recording I'd managed to capture on my phone, arranged everything by date and time, because I had learned something that could not be unlearned. The next time something happened, I would not just be the silent grandmother in the room. I would not stand by. That night, Sophie finally drifted to sleep, worn out by the pain and exhaustion. I sat right there by her side. In the warm glow from the small yellow nightlight on my dresser, Sophie's tear-streaked face looked far too young and fragile for this world. I watched the light catch the soft brown of her hair and reached out to stroke it. "Are you having bad dreams, sweetheart?" I whispered, not expecting any answer. But even though Sophie appeared asleep, one small, warm hand suddenly tightened around my finger. As she clung to me, I understood words weren't needed anymore. I stayed there for hours, not closing my eyes, not shedding a single tear. Instead, my mind wandered through years of memory. I remembered being a schoolteacher, long ago. There was a little girl in my 4th grade class, a sweet, gentle soul, always sitting quietly in the back corner. I noticed bruises, the wariness in her eyes, and suspected what no child should ever have to bear, that she was suffering at home. I reported it, first to the principal, then to Child Protective Services. They acted. She moved away to live with an aunt, far from the man who'd hurt her. Many years later, out of the blue, I received a letter from her. It read, "You were the only one who believed me, when my own family would not. Thank you, Miss Carter." That message hasn't left my mind once, not since all this started happening. I used to teach my students, when adults stay silent, that silence is sharper than any blade. It wounds children more deeply than anything else. And yet, here I was, a teacher, a grandmother, and nearly, just nearly, I'd allowed myself to join that terrible circle of silent adults. Slowly, I stood up, tiptoed across the room, and opened the top drawer of my old oak dresser. There, covered in dust and bill receipts, lay the deed to this house, a thick packet of papers with my own name, Evelyn Carter, printed across the top, dated over 30 years ago. I picked it up, held it tight in my hand, anchoring myself to the truth. I am the owner of this house. No one has the right to make me silent here. And a promise was forming, sharp and shining, in my heart. I will not wait until Sophie's bones are broken. I will not wait until the bruises run so deep they never fade. I will stand. Before my own conscience withers, I will rise. I will never let the shell of family become more important than Sophie's life. When dawn crept into the sky, pale and uncertain, I sat at my desk and opened my notebook computer. I searched for every resource. Child Protective Services, the county's domestic violence helpline, the local family law attorney's office, the nearest social services branch. I wrote every number, every website, every contact in my journal, right next to the evidence I'd collected. Date, time, who to call it, was all there. I knew I had no more time to lose. Because the next time her hand was raised against Sophie, I would not be only the person who keeps a record. I, Evelyn Carter, would be the one to make everything known. 30 years. I'd lived in this house. I bought it the year I retired from teaching, using the small savings I'd tucked away paycheck after paycheck, dreaming of a place for my growing family. Every creak in the stairs, every polished floorboard, every scuff on the door, every bit belonged to me and my memories. I could still hear, if I tried, Richard's childhood laughter in the hallway, Sophie's 3-year-old giggle chasing the family dog, the far-off notes of an old upright piano on hot July evenings. But that night, for the first time, I realized that keeping Sophie safe, even if it meant leaving, mattered more than every echo and memory combined. The clock read 12:15 a.m. The house was silent as snowfall. Outside, a late winter wind rattled loose down the block. I dressed Sophie in her warmest coat and had her slip her small backpack across her shoulders. Inside, there were a few changes of clothes, her immunization records, a copy of our vital documents, and, most precious of all, the battered diary I'd filled across these difficult months. She didn't ask, "Where are we going?" She just reached for my hand and squeezed as hard as she could. Leaning close, I whispered, "We're just going outside for a little bit. I promise, sweetheart, we'll come home someday. But for now, I'm with you. You're not alone." And so, in the dead of night, we left behind everything except the things that truly mattered, the proof, the courage to act, and the bond that no cruelty could break. Because this is what it means, I finally understood, to truly love a child, to act, to protect, to keep their voice from vanishing. And I would do it all, no matter the cost. My granddaughter nodded. How many weeks had it been since I'd seen those eyes? Gently and quietly meeting my own? She gazed at me with a kind of silent understanding, as if, deep down, she already knew, Nana will never leave me alone again. I'd already called ahead to our county's Child Protective Services office. The after-hours caseworker agreed to place Sophie under emergency care for the night, saying, "Bring whatever evidence you have with you." So, I gathered everything, photos of her bruises, recordings on my cell phone, and perhaps hardest, a stack of printouts. Those were screenshots of text messages my granddaughter had hidden from me, but which she finally allowed me to see. I'd promised her this was all for her safety now. One of those messages was from her stepmother. "If you tell that old woman again, it'll hurt even more next time." It still stunned me, how a grown adult could send such words to a child. I had always hoped it wasn't true, but by now, there was no time left. Not for doubts, not for protecting anyone except Sophie. We took a taxi through the hush of the winter night. I rode in the back seat, holding my granddaughter close. My hand trembled, not from cold, but from the knowledge that after this night, our family would never return to what it used to be. Not ever. When we arrived, a woman in a blue uniform met us at the door. She bowed her head slightly, just a gesture of welcoming, and knelt down to Sophie's height, her voice gentle and slow. "What's your name, honey? Are you hungry?" Sophie made no answer. She only pressed her head against my shoulder. I handed over the paperwork and explained what had brought us here. "Bare facts, nothing left out," the woman said. "We'll write a report right away. Ma'am, you'll also need to notify the police. And, please, you should prepare yourself for what's next." I nodded, the truth pressing heavy on my chest. The next morning, I walked through the doors of our local police station. A woman detective listened to my account. As soon as she saw the photos of Sophie's bruises, her lips pressed thin and grim. She called for a forensic specialist to examine Sophie as soon as possible. I told her all of it. No speculation, no embellishment, no self-editing. Exactly what had happened, and what I had seen. She asked, her voice low but clear, "You understand, this could bring legal consequences for your son. Are you sure you want to go forward?" I lifted my head to meet her eyes. My son is a grown man now. But I only have one role left in this world, to be a grandmother, and I cannot stand by and ignore a child living in fear. From that afternoon onward, the news swept through our family like a thunderstorm. The police tried to contact the house. My daughter-in-law, Heather, never answered the door. When an officer called her number, her voice was hard, shaking with anger. "This is all made up some trick between that old woman and the kid to get me in trouble. This is a family matter, and the law's got no business interfering." At 7:00 p.m., my son called me for the first time since I'd left with Sophie. His voice was frantic, nearly yelling, "Mom, what in the world are you doing?" I might lose my job over this words spreading all over. "People at work are talking already," I answered quietly. "You knew that, child. Your daughter was being hit. You chose to do nothing. Now I'm doing something instead. Are you angry that it wasn't you who protected her?" There was silence on the line, long enough for my heart to crack yet again. Then he said reluctantly, "If this gets out, my wife will lose her job. Our whole family will fall apart." What I replied felt like cutting out a piece of my own heart. The thing that's broken here isn't the family, it's your conscience. The following afternoon, I returned to Child Protective Services to visit Sophie. She sat at a table, hunched over a page of drawing paper, shading in bright colors with a fistful of colored pencils. When she looked up and saw me, she leaped from her chair and threw her arms around my waist, holding on as tight as she could. "Nana, nobody yells here. They just talk to me and they listen." I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the ache in my chest mix with a measure of relief. That night, just as the sky outside edged toward black, I heard the doorbell blare through my house. Someone was ringing and ringing, hard enough to make the whole door frame shiver. I opened it, uncertain what to expect. My son Richard stood on the stoop, knees collapsed, head hanging, his whole body shaking. "Mom, please, drop the case. I'm begging you, I was wrong. I'll lose my job, my marriage, everything." I did not cry. I did not shout. I only looked at the man before me, the same boy who once rode in the basket of my bike, who used to call out, "Mom," with his whole heart. But tonight, he was a grown man choosing silence, letting his own child suffer. So I told him, very softly, "If something is already broken, isn't it better to let it go, or do you only want to protect a lie?" He could not answer. He slumped down on the porch, head buried in his hands, and cried as though no one could hear. I stepped inside. For the first time, I left the front door wide open behind me. But inside my heart, I knew. I'd quietly close that door forever. That night, I added one last sentence to my diary. My hands did not tremble today. I made the right choice for Sophie. And, perhaps, for the son who has not yet realized what's been lost. After Richard left, I set about tidying up my kitchen. Not to cook, but to gather everything that, until now, I'd kept for the family. Oh, slowly, quietly, I packed it all away. The handkerchief I'd embroidered with Sophie's name, the set of matching teacups I'd given Richard and Heather when they married, the photo albums stacked high on the living room shelf. I placed them, one by one, inside a single box. There was no hatred in my heart, only a realization. It was time to put my own spirit in order. When I'd finished collecting all the evidence and sorted the documents for Child Protective Services and my attorney, I sat down at the kitchen table and opened an email from the Legal Support Center. It read, "In this process, you may be called to testify in court. It's possible the defense attorney or relatives will question you harshly, even attack your character. But the evidence you've gathered will help protect your grandchild's safety and your own good name." Silently, I nodded. I had not done any of this to protect my reputation. That honor, if I ever had it, was left behind that first winter night I walked out into the snow with Sophie in my arms. Just then, my cell phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "If you don't drop this, you're going to make this much worse." I exhaled deeply. I was not afraid, but the sadness stung, the knowledge that someone out there still believed child abuse was a private matter, something to be settled behind closed doors with threats. I was furious, not for myself, but for every child whose suffering is buried under such silence. I saved the message, adding it to my growing folder of evidence. Outside, snow had just begun to fall, whisper light against the window pane, each white flake melting as soon as it landed. The night was cold, but my heart no longer shivered. And that's when I realized, sometimes the bravest act in this whole uncertain world is simply to refuse to be silent. Not for honor, not for pride, not even for our own children, but for the very ones who cannot speak for themselves until, at last, they find their voice. Starting tomorrow, a long road will unfold ahead. But I know this journey isn't about revenge. It's simply one step taken for a world where my grandchild can grow up without fear. It began on an icy morning in early January. The neighborhood roofs were still frosted white. Breath-formed chilly clouds that hung in the brittle air. And a bone-deep cold pressed in from every side. That was when we received the news. An official call from the police. Heather, my daughter-in-law, the woman who'd married my son after Emily passed, was summoned on charges of child abuse. Not long after, she was taken into custody for questioning. Strangely, I didn't feel relief. Not exactly. Something heavier circled inside my heart. Yet, there was a fragile comfort in knowing someone finally believed Sophie. At the very least, my grandchild's voice had been heard. But the real storm began after that. Reporters from the local paper and online news outlets descended on our little corner of Kingston. Stories broke fast. Kingston grandmother, 74, reports daughter-in-law for child abuse. Upstate community shaken. Grandmother's courage draws national attention. My phone did not stop, ringing journalists at all hours, old colleagues reaching out, and even complete strangers knocking at my front door. One neighbor, Mrs. Lewis, gray hair in a loose bun, arms forever folded, stood on my stoop and warned, "Best to keep family matters to yourself, Evelyn. Nothing good comes from putting your business out for everyone to gawk at." But others shared a different kindness. Mrs. Marino from up on Oak Street came by with a bundt cake and said, "You did what so many are too scared to do. If my sister had a mother like you, she might have grown up safe." The neighborhood split. Some folks whispered that I'd ruined my family. Others stopped me on morning walks to say, in quiet voices, "Thank you for speaking up." None of it swayed me. This wasn't the time for public debate or the opinions of strangers. My only job now was to fight for a place where Sophie could grow up. Safely, somewhere trust could grow again. Only a few days after the arrest, I was called for an interview with our town's social services department and later, at the county family court. They carefully reviewed the diary I'd kept, the photos of Sophie's bruises, the witness statements, and her own quiet words. After some deliberation, they made a ruling. I, Evelyn Carter, would be granted temporary legal guardianship until a final hearing could be held. I remember signing the papers. My signature trembled, but I felt no regret and no hesitation, only the full weight of a promise, finally honored. Given the chance, I would do it all again without question. Start from the very beginning and raise Sophie as many times as I needed. I had left behind my old house. Too many memories there? Too much lingering darkness in the hallways where laughter had once echoed. The sunlight no longer felt welcome in those rooms. Sophie and I moved into a modest one-bedroom apartment just 3 blocks from the school where I'd taught for most of my career. The place was small, barely big enough for 2, a battered gas stove, a threadbare bookshelf, and a heavy old cherrywood desk from my teaching days. But the light in the morning, the quiet chirping of sparrows outside the window, the faint golden sun warming the curtained panes, those small things smoothed a year's worth of ragged nerves. I felt more peace in that cramped apartment than I'd known for years. Slowly, Sophie began to recover as well. Her nightmares waned, and she started finishing her homework on her own. Each night, as we settled in after dinner, she'd tug at my sleeve and say, "Nana, will you tell me another story from when you were little?" So I read. Even when my voice tired or my eyesight blurred, my heart grew stronger each day. One cold morning, I returned to Annandale Elementary, the school that had been the center of my days for decades. The new principal, a kind-faced woman my son's age, recognized me at once and greeted me with a respectful nod. "Mrs. Carter, I've seen the news. Please know our staff stands ready to support you and Sophie in any way we can." I nodded my thanks, reeling quietly through memories of hundreds of children I'd helped grow. Now it was just one. But I understood this was the most important task I'd ever been given. But not all was smooth. "Bah!" Richard? My son disappeared. His phone went straight to voicemail. When I called his office, they said he was on indefinite leave. Every family member I contacted said the same. They hadn't seen or heard from him. For a while, I checked my phone each day hoping for some message. An apology, or maybe a simple sign that he understood. But all I got was silence. One night, an old friend from Richard's childhood called me. He told me what Richard had said. "My mom cares more about being right than about her own family. She doesn't get how hard this is for the younger generation." That stung, but I spoke gently. "No." I made a choice to stand with the child who was being hurt. If doing my duty as a grown-up means destroying a family, then I'll carry that burden. But I won't let another child suffer because grown-ups are too scared to stand up. I started attending support groups for other single grandparents raising children and for older caregivers in our town. Some folks just listened. Others shared tears and stories that felt as raw as my own. One older lady, after hearing me out, squeezed me in a fierce hug and whispered, "You're not alone, honey. We kept quiet for too many years." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words ring in my bones. No more silence. Not from me. One evening, I sat mending Sophie's navy blue school sweater, needle darting in and out of soft wool. Sophie tiptoed up to me and whispered, "Nana, would it be okay if I entered a picture in the art show at school?" I set down my needle and smiled. "Of course, honey. What will you draw?" Sophie grinned, shy but radiant. "You and me. And our new home. I want to call it My Sunlit House with Nana, Qui." And in that instant, my eyes brimmed over, not because she praised me, but because I knew she was finally beginning to heal. Our little apartment was no mansion. Yet at night, it rang with the sound of storybooks read aloud, with the soft scratch of colored pencils, with laughter that grew brighter each week. The outside world might call me the stubborn old lady who broke apart her family, the woman who meddled and ruined things. Maybe I was, in someone's eyes. But here, I was Nana, the only Nana Sophie had, the one she could always trust. That's a title I'd never, ever surrender. Though our lives had been pared down, though money was tight and our possessions few, I kept my old rituals. Each morning at 5:30, I awoke, brewed a cup of tea, and sat quietly with a book by the window, watching the first golden light creep between the trees. Our apartment was on the 3rd floor, enough to take in the leaves along Maple Lane, watching green give way to gold and then drift down with the chill autumn wind. Those little changes stilled my heart, reminded me life would shift again someday, maybe for the better. Sophie still slept, breathing deep under her patchwork quilt. In that hush, I took out my notebook, the one that once kept every scar and sorrow. Now it held hope. Small notes about Sophie's progress, drawings she gave me, scraps of conversations so ordinary but so precious. I was learning to believe again, letting trust sprout slow and gentle inside me. One Saturday, as I cleaned the apartment's communal bookshelf, I found an old piece of folded paper tucked in the far corner. Its discovery was a tiny, ordinary miracle amid the day-to-day like so many we'd begun to find, in the quiet, sunlit heart of our new life. It was a letter, just a simple, folded slip of white paper, tucked into my mailbox between the grocery flyers and electric bill. No return address, no signature, just careful handwriting, steady, old-fashioned, the type that comes from someone who takes pride in their penmanship. "Your grandson is such a polite young man," it read. The other day, he picked up a package I dropped and handed it to me with a smile and "Here you go, ma'am. I hope good things keep coming your way. I wish you both peace and happiness for all the days ahead." That was all, just a handful of words, only enough to fill a corner of my chest. But as I stood in my small kitchen, sunlight striping the laminate in mid-morning bands, I pressed the letter over my heart and let the words settle deep. Because for me, for us, that letter was proof. A first little sign from the world outside that the way we'd been walking was not wrong or foolish or shameful. That, even if nobody had said it out loud before, someone noticed. Someone saw us, not as people to whisper about, but as a family with hope and dignity left. For the first time since everything unraveled, I could see, in someone else's quiet kindness, a measure of affirmation. That afternoon, I brewed Sophie's favorite ginger tea and sat by the window, watching my grandson color on the carpet. His brow furrowed in concentration. He reminded me of his mother at his age. All inward focus, all careful little movements. Lately, I'd begun to reconsider everything. Should I try moving us again? A new school? A new town? Some place where he could start fresh? Somewhere children didn't already carry whispers about that little boy with the scandal. I wanted him to have a place where nobody knew his past, where he could be just another kid, not someone weighed down by sorrow. And something else too, quietly, without telling even my closest friend, I'd reached out to a children's counseling center in town. Not because I was worried anything was wrong with my grandson, not at all. Only because I didn't want to overlook even the smallest scar, the faintest bruise, inside his heart, all for the sake of adult convenience. I'd been a teacher once. I'd watched children hide pains that no grown-up bothered to notice. I knew the wounds you can't see can sting worse than any scraped knee or broken arm. If someone doesn't spot them and listen, those hurts keep pulsing, quietly, deep in the heart, long after the world moves on. So yes, I called. Not because I thought anything was broken in him only, because I didn't want to ever risk missing even a whisper of a wound. There was something else on my mind these days. The court's decision, a real, legal ruling might change what the world called our rights, might change who got to sign a school form or open a bank account. But the truth that mattered most to me, the piece I worried about at night, wasn't something a judge could restore. Trust. The quiet, golden seam that runs through every real family. And I'd come to understand, through all of this, that no court order nor apology could ever stitch it back together. Only love steady as slow rain drift, gentle but relentless, could offer us any hope for repair. A year passed. Looking back, it felt like no time at all, and like the longest stretch of my life. In every way that counted, my grandson and I lived more in those months than ever before. The turning of the seasons, green hills melting into gold, bare-branched November, then sharp winter, a kind of lifetime. Another winter settled over our town. Our apartment windows traced up with icy patterns, the wind rattling bare branches across the rooftop. The air was sharp enough to press straight through my fingers. But inside, in our tiny unit on the top floor, my spirit was warm in a way I'd thought lost forever. Family court had issued their final ruling. My daughter-in-law, Heather, was stripped of parental rights permanently. Not just custody. No legal connection at all, nor even visitation. The documentation was clear. Permanent revocation of custodial and visitation rights. They looked at every piece of evidence, the photos, the recordings, the threatening text messages, and Sophie's own psychologist's report, every bit pored over, every fact cross-checked. The hearing itself lasted only 45 minutes. Richard, my son, didn't attend. His lawyer sent a letter, could not reach my client. When the clerk read the judgment aloud, Heather just sat there, shoulders tight, eyes blank, and dipped her head once, like the last flicker of a lost fight. I sat in the little waiting area, hands curled in my lap around a small, lumpy handkerchief. Sophie had knit it for me, green and oddly shaped but precious. Megan, our caseworker from social services, the one who'd guided us both for a year, sat beside me. She touched my elbow, voice gentle. "Well, it's finished now, Mrs. Daria. Carter." I shook my head. My voice was soft but sure. "No, this isn't the end. This is the beginning." That afternoon, we walked back through snow to our apartment. The air was crisp, the sidewalks sparkling with leftover salt and sunlight. I didn't gush or cry or announce victory. Instead, I placed the folder with the court's paperwork quietly on the kitchen table and let it rest in the pool of late-day sun. Sophie, just as always, kicked off her boots, washed her hands, and made a beeline for the bedroom corner where his art supplies waited. I wasn't surprised. He picked up the picture he'd entered last month in the elementary art show. He'd called it "Me and Nana in the Sunlight House," and started repainting the walls, smoothing over faded browns with deep, hopeful yellows. The drawing was simple. A watercolor house, window thrown wide, morning light streaming in. Inside, two figures, one old, one small, sitting at a breakfast table, arms close. Beyond the porch, green grass and wild plants tumbled in the edges, and steam curled up from a mug of tea. No tears in that picture. No shadows. No fear. Only one thing, a quiet, steady sense of safety. When the artwork was called out at the school assembly, the whole cafeteria, ringed with parents and teachers, I found myself standing to my feet when his name was read. Not out of surprise, but because it was the moment I'd been holding inside too, full to stay seated. Sophie climbed up to the stage, his watercolor framed, and took the certificate from the principal's hand. The applause echoed, bouncing against the gym rafters, thunder for a quiet child. A young reporter crouched, pen in hand. "What did you paint?" Sophie smiled, clear and gentle. "My house. The place where I don't have to cry anymore." A room fell silent. Not because of skill or technique. The applause that followed wasn't for brushstrokes or shading. It was for thee. Truth. A small heart had found the courage to speak. Afterward, many people approached me, women's group leaders, a local principal who remembered me from my teaching years. Some neighbors too. Mrs. Carter, your grandson seems so much better now. Would you be willing to share your story? About what it means to be a grandparent guardian? About how we can help children? At risk? I hesitated. One beat, no more. Then I nodded. Soon after, I stood at the front of a church basement, the folding chairs filled with faces from all walks of life. I spoke about protecting children, about the role we older folks have, about not sugarcoating or skipping the hard details, about courage and simple decency. When I finished, a young woman hugged me, sobbing. She told me, "My mother was always quiet, she never spoke up for us. That's why I never got to be just a kid. You did what I always hoped a grown-up would do for me. You didn't just stand by." I didn't say much. I only stroked her hair as gently as I'd once comforted Sophie, night after troubled night. In the weeks that followed, something began to shift in our little community. The same folks who once murmured behind their hands now greeted me on morning walks. Some even stopped by, bringing puzzles and storybooks for Sophie. I never asked for pity and didn't want it. But the kind of quiet understanding people offered instead, the little acts of neighborliness and kindness, they were gifts I had never expected, and I held them close. One evening, as I cooked soup while Sophie worked through his math homework, he paused and looked up at me. "Nana, does my mom still hate me?" I set aside my spoon, pulled him close, and whispered in his ear, "No one truly hates their own child, not deep down. But sometimes, grown-ups forget how to love because of their own fears and sadness. But you are never alone. Plus, Nana is here, always. I promise." Sophie nodded, tucked his head under my arm, and without a word picked up his pencil and kept on working. He was growing. I could see it. Each day carrying his own hope, a little less broken by what was no longer spoken. We still kept in touch with Megan and the folks from social services. They let me know Heather had begun court-mandated therapy and was working off service hours with the city. If, one day, she truly changed, she could apply to see Sophie again, but only if he wanted it. That, I was told, should be his choice alone. Richard, my son, no one had heard from him. He'd vanished from the city, leaving only echoes and regret. I had stopped searching. Life, I believe, teaches us about value only after loss. I still kept a place at my little table, one extra chair at supper, a pair of chopsticks in the drawer. Forgiveness isn't about waiting, but about not closing the door forever. So, time kept moving, and we, just me and Sophie, began to dream our own quiet dreams. A small garden on our narrow balcony, strawberry pots nestled by the rail, clusters of mint and thyme. One evening, as we watered the seedlings, Sophie looked up, eyes shining. "Nana, next year can we make breakfast with our own vegetables?" "Yes, sweetheart. Next year, and every year you want." This was a house built not of walls or windows, but of patience, second chances, and a love that would not be silent. And as for me, my greatest fear now was not the cold or the past, but only that there might still be children out there trapped inside the old silence. My hope is that, somewhere, other Nana Carters, other grandmas, mothers, teachers are listening and ready to stand up for their own little ones too. I nodded, tears shimmering quietly in my eyes. There was a time, not so long ago, when the very word family had grown sour on my tongue. I could not believe in it. Perhaps I didn't dare. My trust, once so easy and wide, had been whittled away by the years, by betrayals and blows I never expected to feel inside my own home. But now I know differently. Family is not a number of people. It's not the size of the dinner table or the blood on a birth certificate. It isn't created or measured by last names or shared history. Family takes shape from the depth of love that lives there, the kindness, the small rituals, the growing and repairing of hearts together. And so, I can say, from the bottom of my heart today, I am deeply, quietly happy. Not because I won a court case. Not for any paperwork or legal victory. No. My happiness is for something else entirely. Because, in the end, I did not lose to silence. I did not lose to silence. Because, for once in my long years, I am proud of the choice I made when the world wanted me to look the other way. In the beginning, after all the upheaval, after Sophie and I settled into our new little apartment, I started to recover some of the small habits that I had all but forgotten in our old house. Simple things, a return to hand-stitched embroidery, tea brewed the way my own mother taught me, strong and fragrant, poured into thick white mugs. I even copied out some of the poems I'd once taught my fourth graders. Back in the days when my hair was only streaked with silver, not fully white, every morning, in our sunlit nook by the window, I set a neat, white linen cloth on our dining table. It isn't much, just a little folding table squeezed between heater and window, but it's ours. Sophie and I sit side by side. I savor my morning tea, the steam gentle on my face, while she crunches into cinnamon toast, chewing thoughtfully as she disappears into a storybook, always one more chapter before school. One morning, soft, warm, with the hush of a coming spring, Sophie chattered away about her classroom, about Mrs. Pyde, the Pickford's silly shoes, about a friend sharing lunch, about the art show coming up. Then she looked up, sudden and shy. "Nana, when I get big, can I still live here?" "With you?" I laughed before I could stop myself, the sound new and lovely, like something that had been locked away too long. I reached to smooth her hair. "As long as you want to come home, honey, my door will be open." She met my eyes, that clear, searching gaze so like her mother's, and answered, a little voice so sure it filled the whole room. "Because, Nana, when I'm here, I can always say how I really feel." In that instant, I understood all over again what security really means. It's not locks or fences or alarms. It's not about keeping the world out. Real safety lives in the place where children are not denied, and where someone, Oster, always, is willing to listen. If the world could grant me a little more time, I think I'd write it all down. These years, these trials, these aching, dazzling moments. Not to assign blame, not to polish up my own small bravery, but to create a signpost, a trail for anyone who's lost sight of love in their family, a way back when they're ready. One day may come when I can no longer take Sophie's hand at the crosswalk. Before then, I want to give her something no age, no sorrow, no time can fade. A memory of a grandmother who never let go. I did not choose revenge. I did not set out to find forgiveness either. Both are too simple. Neither would have saved Sophie. Forgiveness to me is not real unless both people admit their wrongs, unless both hearts are willing to heal together. Revenge, I've learned, breeds nothing but deeper wounds, a never-ending line of sadness, echoing forward and back. I have lived a long, hard life. I know this for sure. There are no real winners in a house where one child is hurting. No way to measure victory while someone tiny and afraid is bleeding in silence. I chose just one thing, to keep loving, without conditions. To pour out all the love I have left, as one grandmother, for my one and only granddaughter. If the world thinks that's naive, then so be it. There were people in the neighborhood, even in my own family, who called me cruel for the choice I made. Did you have to tear apart your son's marriage? Was it really worth the trouble? Just for one child, did it matter enough to risk everything? Yes, it did. And it always will. Because if protecting normal means looking away from the daily violence that hides behind closed doors, if that's what cruelty really is, then I will gladly tear down that fragile piece. Let it break. We can rebuild. Maybe I never taught my son enough about what happiness truly is. Maybe I failed him somewhere along the way, but I know one thing for sure. When my Sophie was crying, I did not choose to pretend I could not hear. 1 year has slipped by since the court's ruling. Our life together, just the two of us, is not glamour or comfort. We have little. But every day, there is meaning. We share breakfast at that window table, 10 tiny planters of spinach and cherry tomatoes on the balcony. Read together each night, shoulder to shoulder, light warming the slow dusk. Sophie has begun writing essays at school, shy but determined. One afternoon, she pressed a lined paper into my hands. "Nana, will you read this?" It's my essay, The Most Important Person. The words were jumbled, the spelling sometimes wild, the grammar far from perfect. But the last line racked my throat in quiet. My Nana is the first person who ever heard my voice. Even when everyone else in the family kept quiet, Nana listened. Right then, I knew there was nothing left to accuse. Not my son, not myself. There was only hope. Someday, Richard may find a new family, may welcome his own child into the world. When that happens, I hope he'll remember, not my pain, not the judgments of his neighbors, not old wounds or pride, but this: there was once a mother who stood her ground, who chose to face society, rumor, her own flesh and blood, and refused to back down just to save a single child. If he recalls that, maybe he won't repeat the same mistakes. Maybe he'll choose differently. If one day he knocks on our little apartment door, I will answer. Not to scold or shame, but so he might finally hear. Real love does not disappear, even when nobody apologizes. I'm starting to write down my story now. Not for fame, not for praise, only because, if even one person reads it and stops for a heartbeat, asks themselves, am I listening to the children around me? Am I really choosing their safety over my own reputation? Am I standing silent when what's needed is a voice? I'm nobody special, just a person who, at my age, finally knows. If you do not stand in the one moment that matters, no amount of regret will ever bring back what you lose. There were times when I faltered too. I told myself, if I can just bear it a little longer, maybe I won't destroy what's left of our family. But there's no true peace in a house where everyone simply endures. No harmony worth having if a child suffers in silence. A world that calls a person cruel for protecting a child cannot be allowed to stand. I believe that with all of me. Courage isn't shouting. It's the quiet decision to do what's right, even when your hands shake, even when your chest aches, even if the whole world watches in judgment, you choose to stand up anyway. My days are quiet now. I cook on a tiny gas stove. I water our plants by hand. I fold blankets in the morning, make tea at dusk, open our windows to welcome the sunlight every day. And I keep, by that sunlit window, a small chair, empty, waiting, so that if anyone, one day, wants to try again, to make amends, to come home, they will know there is a seat ready. Whoever you are, wherever you live, may be reading my story these long years later. If you find yourself facing a choice, if you see a child's tears and still do not act, I have only one question to leave with you. Are you letting a child's silent cries go unheard? When telling the truth means risking hurt, when protecting the innocent costs you comfort or peace, will you find your place on the side of love? Have you chosen silence when you could have spoken up? You don't owe me your answer, but I hope you will answer yourself. That day on the playground, that moment in the kitchen, that hush before bedtime, are you truly listening? Not just with your ears, but with your whole heart. Because, out there somewhere, someone's Sophie needs you to do what I once did, to refuse to be silent. I beg you, let that be the story you write too. Because your small action today could be the difference that saves just one life tomorrow. After hearing my story, what are you feeling right now? Have you ever experienced anything like this in your own life? Is there something you wish you could say to children like my granddaughter? To the next generation? Please share your thoughts, your words in the comments below. Because, who knows, maybe just a single sentence, right now, at this very moment, might become the light that shines hope for someone. Wandering in the dark, maybe your voice, your story, your quiet encouragement will be the warmth that someone needs to keep going. Even if you feel it doesn't matter, sometimes the smallest kindness, the honest truth, is the spark that helps another survive the night. So if you are moved at all, don't let it vanish. Pass it on. We never know whose world we might help change with the courage of saying, "You're not alone." Someone is listening.